Hello and welcome everybody again to ICMDA webinars. I'm Dr. Peter Saunders, the Chief Executive of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association, which brings together over 80 national associations of Christian doctors and dentists representing some 60,000 practitioners around the world. And today on ICMDA webinars, we're pleased to have back Dr. Shari Falkenheimer, who's going to speak to us on Going on Mission Without Leaving Home, an intriguing title. So it's my real privilege to introduce Dr. Shari Falkenheimer. This subject, going on mission without leaving home. Missions is not geographic, but cross-cultural, and God is bringing the nations to us so that we can reach out to them where we live and work. They may be more open to the gospel while out of their own cultural setting. Many are never in a Christian's home while they're in their new country, and they're intensely lonely. And God's put us near them to love them, to help them to adjust to our culture and to share our lives, our testimonies, and the gospel with them. So that's what today's all about. Dr. Shari Falkenheimer, who's MD, MPH, MA in bioethics, and PhD. She's board certified in aerospace medicine. She has over 40 years of experience in a variety of roles, including teaching, applied research, clinical medicine, medical leadership, and planning. She mentors the Albany, New York Medical CMDA group and has taught in 30 nations around the world. She is also an international advisory board member for the Christian Journal for Global Health, a member of the American Academy of Bioethics, and a life member of the U.S. Christian Medical and Dental Association, which is the largest of ICMDA's over 80 national groups. So, Shari, it's just lovely to have you back here again with us, and we really look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Let me share my screen. Good. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm really thankful that you decided to join us, and I wanted to talk on this topic because I think there's so many opportunities that sometimes we miss because we think of missions as going somewhere else. Many of us, I'm sure, have been on short-term mission trips. Maybe some of you have even served long-term, which certainly is very effective. And many may want to go on trips and not even have the funds. But I'm hoping to show you today that most of us don't really need to go anywhere to do mission and to reach out to internationals, many from very unreached countries that are all around us. And I hope the Lord will motivate each of you to be involved in some way if you're not already. It's a great opportunity. I've been involved in some way with international students or others from other countries since my college days, and it's a wonderful experience. I think also we should think about why are we going to other places to reach out to internationals if we're not doing it where we live, where people are around us that we can reach, that we can have long-term relationships with. So those are some of the thoughts I'd like you to consider. And there are many definitions of missions, of course. Evangelism is something we do with anyone, and usually it's pretty easy, or at least easier, to do evangelism and share with people from our own cultural group. But missions is really needed when there are groups that there are so few believers in their culture that they need outsiders to help bring the gospel, at least to the point that they're able to be self-reproducing in their own country, or especially in the case of things like medicine and some educational and agricultural areas, for example, missionaries are often needed in special areas to help in ways that there aren't enough people in the country or in the geographic area to provide the help. So we shouldn't think of missions as going somewhere, but reaching out cross-culturally. There's a course called Perspectives on the World Christian Movement, and now there's a Perspectives Global, which is a basic course on missions. And one thing it talks about is how God reaches out across different relationships to bring people to him. And of course, sending believers to the unreached is usually what many of us think of as missions. Sometimes they go voluntarily. That's typical of missionaries that go to teach or serve or reach out in other countries. But especially historically and even today, some go involuntarily. They may be captured in war, for example, by Muslim groups, and God can use them among the people that have captured them. Some are forced into marriages in other groups, and that's not the desirable way for us to reach out. But the thing I want to focus on today is that God also sends unreached to believers, to places where there are a lot of believers who can reach out to them. And some go voluntarily, such as international students, sometimes immigrants, and some involuntarily, such as refugees, which we see at a really unprecedented level these days. So God is sending the unreached to many of the countries where we're free to share the gospel and reach out to them. And as Peter already mentioned, many of them don't really know a local person who can help them understand the culture, answer their questions, show them love and concern, help them with practical things. So who is God sending to us? These are different groups. I'll talk a little bit about each. I've been in categories 1 and 4. I was an international student in a European country, and I lived with a family there, which was a great advantage in learning about the culture and understanding things. And then I was also a foreign worker assigned by the U.S. Air Force to Japan, and got to have that kind of interaction, and knew a young Japanese believer who was very helpful in understanding the culture and what was happening there. So I speak from personal benefit as well as experience in both directions. It's not a new thing that people have recognized that God's bringing people to us. In 1947, a group called International Fellowship of Evangelical Students was founded, which is now in about 180 nations. And this book on the left, The World at Your Doorstep, came out in 1984. It was one of my introductions to the need for international student ministry and the opportunities there are. I know this is before many of you were born, but it's really not a new thing. It's just that we often don't think of it as mission, and many times the internationals are not really reached out to or welcomed by local believers. International students, of course, is a very big thing. You can see there are a lot of resources for people who want to study in other countries. There's the top left is for people who want to come to the States. There's one for Canada. The one in the middle is for people who want to go to the UK. And there are other countries, of course. I don't have the books, but they probably have them in other languages where people are seeking to study internationally. They're estimated to be over 5 million international students at present, and that it will go up to 8 million by 2030. And these are the places. This is a little dated, but it's always hard to get data on the current year. But you can see where most of the international students come from. Of course, India has very few believers and can be a great opportunity to reach Hindus and Muslims and others from India who are studying in your country. China has a lot of believers, of course, but many who come to study abroad don't know the Lord yet, and that can be a huge opportunity. I've seen people come here from China. In fact, my church is involved with a ministry that reaches out to Chinese international students. Some have come to faith, have been discipled, and are able to return and and be Christian leaders. Some have been in prominent positions. You know, most international students are from fairly influential families and can have a big impact on their country if they come to Christ. And even places like Saudi Arabia, where you're not free to share the gospel, there are Saudis that have gone to many countries, as well as Vietnamese. So God is really sending people from many unreached areas. And these are only the most common places. Pretty much every country has internationals. I was just in a 100% Muslim country in North Africa and met a young man who had studied here in the US. So there's pretty much people from every country going to different countries for training. Where do they go? These are the top 10 countries. Over 1 million come to the United States, but about 500,000 go to the UK, Canada, China, and Australia. And you can see others on the right. If you look at these countries, you can see most of these countries, there's no restriction on sharing the gospel. And many of you are in CMDAs in those countries and hopefully have opportunities to connect with some of these people. Then there are immigrants. In the United States, of course, we have a huge number of immigrants. About 15% of our population were not born in the United States. And more than half aren't proficient in the local language, which is English, of course, which alone can be a great opportunity. When I was studying in Boston, every Friday night I met with a group of internationals who wanted to just practice English conversation. And there are many opportunities without being formally trained in teaching English to share your local language and reach out to them. And then you can see these are the other countries that have the most immigrants. You might be surprised to see Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We don't usually think of those as places people emigrate, and many of those are really going there for work, not really to immigrate and become nationals. But you can see the other countries listed, again, are places where we can freely share the gospel and have great opportunities. And of course, things have changed a lot since 2020. Immigrants and refugees from particularly the Ukraine have spread out in many countries in Europe too. And then where do they go? Well, you can see many of these countries are not places where there's freedom to share the gospel, but certainly Germany there is. And many workers, Christian workers, are in these countries trying to reach out. But even if you're not in those countries, people who have gone to these countries as immigrants or refugees often move on to other countries through migration and the UN, and may be in your midst. And then this is the top 10 countries who have refugees. And you can see again that these are many from very unreached places where you can't just go share the gospel. And even if you're a missionary there, it can be very difficult. And if you've ever lived in another country, like I did when I was in Japan, for example, for 18 months, or when I was in Europe was, of course, much more similar. But connecting with someone who is from the local country can just be so important and meaningful to you. Well, why should we care for these internationals? Sure, there are lots of them around us. Well, a major reason is because God is concerned for special groups that are particularly vulnerable, and foreigners are one of them. God watches over them, we hear in Psalm 146. And we're not to oppress them, as it says in Jeremiah and Zechariah. God has special care for them because they're in a situation where they don't know the local environment and culture. They often are in need of many different practical things, as well as support of friendships. And so God cares for them, and so should we. And then God commands us to care for them. Leviticus tells the Israeli people that they should love the foreigner as themselves. Of course, we should all love our neighbors as ourselves, but the foreigner should not be neglected or looked down on. And why? Because they were foreigners in Egypt. And then in Deuteronomy, we read again that God loves the foreigner residing among us, and we're to love them. And the most important reason, of course, is God wants them to know him. He's put many people in difficult situations or uncomfortable situations so that they'll be more open to help, to new ideas, and often to the gospel. So as it says in Deuteronomy, he sent foreigners so they can listen and learn to fear the Lord our God. Of course, there are many media methods that are used and available to them, but the person near them who shows care and models Christ is the most effective. And then, as in Matthew in the Great Commission, God has told us to make disciples of all nations. And it doesn't mean you have to go to another country. My understanding of the Greek is that it says, while you're going, make disciples. So wherever you are, make disciples of all nations. And what an opportunity to reach out to people like Afghans or Syrians or, people from countries you wouldn't even want to visit because of the dangers, who have been through tremendous trauma and difficulties and need to be loved. Also in Revelation, in order for us to eventually be in heaven where there are people from every tribe, language, people, and nation, all these nations and people groups need to be reached with the gospel. So God is using all four of these methods to bring them to opportunities. And then I think it's important for us not to forget that we're foreigners ourselves. We're not home yet. Our home is heaven. We may be citizens of earthly countries, but it's not our final home. Ephesians remind us that we used to be separate from Christ, like many of these internationals, and excluded from citizenship in whatever country we're in, and foreigners to the covenant of God. And also in Hebrews, it reminds us that those who were living by faith admitted and remembered that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. And Peter tells us that we should live out our time here as foreigners in reverent fear. So it's helpful if we remember our situation as well and identify in that way with the foreigners among us. Well, how can you meet internationals? I think we are particularly privileged to be in healthcare because many healthcare institutions in many countries have workers from other countries, many of whom are from very unreached places. And you don't really need to do anything special if you just look around yourself at work, try to meet and interact and build a relationship with coworkers that are from these countries, and God will often take it from there. But you can also look around your neighborhood. When I was growing up, my whole neighborhood was white Americans. Now, about 70 years later, we have people on our street. We have two families from Pakistan. We have people from the Caribbean. We have mixed race couples. So there are people in our neighborhood from other countries, some very unreached. My Pakistani neighbors last year came at the end of Ramadan, which we're in now, to bring me food, which is often something they do. And I was able to give them the Injil, or the New Testament, in Urdu, in their language, as a gift in return, and they accepted it happily. So there are many opportunities we have right in our neighborhood. And then certainly in schools and colleges, international students and children of immigrants and refugees who may need help with schooling. Many local churches have ethnic ministries or congregations. In our church, we had a former missionary to Nepal who spoke Nepali, and a bunch of immigrants from Bhutan who spoke Nepali came to our area. So we were able to have a tremendous ministry reaching out to them with a former missionary God provided who could speak Nepali while they were learning English. Also, most countries have ethnic restaurants and stores. I'm not sure I've ever been anywhere, for example, there wasn't a Chinese restaurant. And those are places you can connect with people from other countries. And then if you look for service ministries, there are often opportunities. So it really doesn't take a lot of effort to meet with internationals. But we need to prepare and be empowered by God. And most important is prayer, asking God to reveal to you who he wants you to befriend and reach out to. And then praying regularly and persistently for wisdom and for God to draw them. I have a friend I met in college who was from another country, who was involved in our Christian fellowship, but I later found out didn't really know the Lord. He just liked the love and the fellowship we had. And I'm still in contact with him over 40 years later, continuing to share the gospel and visit when I'm in his country, visit he and his wife. He hasn't come to faith yet. It takes a lot of long-term persistence, but God may still answer that prayer for him to come to know God. So it isn't always a short-term ministry, but especially with internet, Zoom, email, it's very easy to keep relationships, even with people like international students who are here in your country a short time and then return. And then most important, I think, is you have to be bold and willing to step out of your comfort zone to get to know these internationals and learn what their hopes and needs are. I'm really kind of an introvert and found it hard to just go up and meet people. But that's been helpful to me because it's helped me see that there are others, especially internationals, who feel the same way and are lonely. And God has helped me to be bold in that way. And I hope will help you too if you're not already. How can you bless internationals? Just modeling what it's like to be a Christian. Many have never seen someone live the Christian life, show love to those who are not part of their family or their in-group, show compassion, build a friendship, and spend time together. That's one of the most important ways to just to help them, if not eventually see God reach them. We shouldn't reach out to them just to bring them to Christ. We should try to meet their practical needs as friends. And then many don't know the local language and would like to use it either to practice it, or you may be able to help with classes that are already set up that you can just go for an hour a week or something. Many children, especially whose parents don't know the local language, may need help with tutoring for school. And then many don't even know how to use a stove or set up a bank account or just do the basic kinds of things that we need to do to live. And you can help them, get their driver's license, learn how to ride the bus, just practical things. One thing that is a great opening is sharing about holidays and customs. All of us as believers have holidays like Easter and Christmas, which are great opportunities to ask internationals, do you know why we celebrate this, what it's about, and explain it to them, and even bring them along and explain why we're doing the things we do as celebrations. And then in some countries like the US and Canada, I don't know how many, we have a Thanksgiving holiday where we can talk about why we give thanks to God. And so explaining holidays and helping them understand the customs and how to behave is a great way to help them. And then sharing scripture in their language. Some are open to learning English through using the Bible. When I was, this is not them coming to us, but when I was in Japan, there was an American doctor who was at a local hospital, and he was teaching the residents to learn English using the Bible. And when he left, he asked me to take his place. And so I was able to just use the scripture in English, and that can be done here as well. And the Bible, especially the New Testament, has been translated into most of the major languages of the world. So helping them to have a copy of Scripture in their language and try to understand Western civilization or Christian behavior through reading the Bible can be helpful. I had a Chinese teacher here who wanted to study the Bible. And during COVID, we had a 1 hour a week online time where she would read the Bible in Chinese, and then we would discuss it in English and discuss her questions. So there are many ways you can bless internationals. Also, many local churches have programs you can be part of. We already talked about helping with language. We have food banks and practical things to help the people with their needs, sometimes furniture ministries. And then there may be official immigrant and refugee service programs in your country or your state or your province. Let me just give you a couple examples. I'm sure there are many, but two people I know personally who were international students in the US. I was not involved in reaching out to them, but they became friends later. One was a student from Iran who was here in the US studying engineering and came to faith in Christ and married an American and eventually went to Turkey, where he was providing Bible training to Iranian leaders who had come across the border in order to be taught more about how to lead churches and share the scriptures. And then another friend from Japan was here in the US studying, and he also came to faith and ended up marrying an American. And they actually went to be missionaries in Turkey for about 10 years, and now are back in Japan, where he is helping plant churches and reach out to the Japanese people. So Iran and Japan, both very unreached places. You know, somebody spent time with these two people, and God did an amazing thing. And you probably know people in your area you could talk about as well, how God's used that. I'm sure there are many. So I think the most important thing about the talk today is to challenge you. After we finish today, please take time to ask God what steps you should take to go on mission without leaving home. You know, it's doing the word, not just hearing the word. That's important. And now we should understand that God really cares for internationals, foreigners, and wants to have us love them and reach out to them. So I would encourage you to prayerfully consider how to do this if you're not already, and particularly make it a matter of prayer. It's good to have a daily prayer list of at least one or two people that you're trying to reach out to and ask for God's wisdom and help. And I often serve with this ministry, MEI, Medical Education International, and its founder, shortly before he died, said there's nothing better in this world than serving Jesus. And I think we all would agree with that. So to God be the glory. I have some time for questions and comments now. Peter will lead that, but also when you get this, there'll be some resources listed like these that you might find helpful in reaching out to internationals.
Thanks very much, Shari, for that brilliant overview of the opportunities and the practical ways of being involved. We've got time now for question and answers. So thanks so much, Shari. Just to kick off, just tell us a bit, can you tell us a little bit about your own personal journey with this challenge? I know you're a person, you've visited over 30 countries, you've traveled all over the world with MEI, you've served abroad cross-culturally, but what opened up your eyes to the opportunities for mission without traveling within the US in particular?
Well, I think it really started with college, where I met this young man from a European country. There weren't many international students at the college I went to. This was in the 70s, so there weren't as many international students, period. But I've always been attracted to learning about other countries and cultures, and he actually became part of our Christian fellowship on on campus, so I saw him a lot. And that really showed me the benefit of developing relationships. And as I said, whenever I go through Europe, if I have time, I often visit him and his wife. And we've had a long, continuing relationship, he and I, as well as another colleague who was there at the same time, actually a couple of colleagues from that same group. So that was the start. And then as I went to medical school, there were a number of students from other countries at the medical school. The ones I knew were actually African believers who went to the same church I did, so I learned more about their cultures. But also there are international students who went to that church who were from other countries and were going to Syracuse University, which is a very big university. And there was a person in town, a family, that had a weekly gathering at their home. I can't remember if it was after church, but sometime on the weekend, there would be a potluck every week for anyone who wanted to come, especially international. So it was a great way to really connect with people from a lot of countries. And throughout my career, really, when I was in the Air Force, a couple locations I've been have a Defense Language Institute where people are there to learn English well enough to go to American military schools, and they have friendship programs. So I had a friendship partner from Egypt when I was in Ohio. I had ones from Myanmar, formerly Burma, when I was in San Antonio, and a number of other countries. Living overseas really helped me know what it's like to be a foreigner in another country, and see the need for the kinds of just practical things. Explain, why do people do this? What are things I shouldn't do? And that was very helpful, both those who are believers and those who weren't, who could help me orient to the new situation and fit in better. And then, I have, as my neighborhood has changed, I've tried to meet the neighbors and reach out as the Lord gives opportunities, especially to the internationals. It's interesting to me that people like Pakistanis are very open to talking about God and spiritual things, much more so than typical Americans. So sometimes it's even easier to talk about God with people like that. And Muslims believe in Jesus as a prophet. It says many things in the Quran about him that we can agree with. So I've found, those are good touch points. You can tell stories about Jesus. So it's really been a continuing journey for me as I've been in different places and interacted with different groups. I was also involved with the ministry to the Nepali-speaking Bhutanese. Sometimes it was simple things like driving them to a medical appointment and helping them understand what was happening, bringing them to church. Some of them wanted to come, even though they weren't believers. Some were believers, and there was a Nepali-speaking congregation for a while at our church. So it's been a wide range of things. And it's just really been a pleasure as well. And I also felt like, why should I go and try to reach people in other countries if I'm not doing it at home, I remember going to the Student Mission Conference, Urbana, and one of the speakers there, Paul Little, saying, don't expect you can just go be an effective evangelist in another country if you're not doing it at home. So that's a long answer to your question. But
yeah, no, that's great, and a lot of that resonates with my own experience too. When, in fact, international students was one of the big things that led me out of clinical medicine. Many years ago, we'd worked in Africa. We came to the UK. We're at a missionary training college here, and I was doing surgical locums around the country and student ministry, and it was the time when the Berlin Wall was coming down, and God just opened up my eyes to the incredible opportunities for ministry amongst internationals, people who God had brought here from countries that were often closed to traditional avenues of mission work. And yeah, it's great. We live in a town just north of London, which has always been called leafy green, in the sense that it is filled with British upper middle class people. But over the last 3 years, we've always had a big number of Bengali Muslims here. several thousand. But over the last 2 years, we've had a massive influx of first Ukrainians, and then secondly, Chinese, so much so that we've started up a new Cantonese-speaking congregation at church, and there's an amazing outreach going on amongst the Chinese people here. So I guess it's being aware, and God often opens doors on our doorstep that we didn't imagine. Yeah. So
right, and
questions coming in.
Go ahead.
Yeah, carry on, Shari.
I was just going to say one thing I neglected to mention is if you live in your capital city or somewhere there are consulates, diplomats are another group. There are often ways to connect with. I was involved when I lived near Washington, D.C. There was a ministry that helped diplomats, families who wanted to learn English, and I was able to be an English partner with a wife of someone from one of the most unreached Muslim countries. So, don't neglect that often people in high places who God can greatly use if they come to faith, as well as international students, are opportunities.
Yeah. So the questions are coming in. Rod McRory asks, do you think it's better to specialize in one culture of origin that you can get to know well, or can we work with any culture? What's your thoughts about that?
I would say pray to God, but I think it is helpful if God calls you to a certain group. Like I have a real heart for Muslims that may be coming through. My first 2 mission trips were actually to Arab Muslim countries, and I've learned more about Islam, about what they believe, how you can interact. So I think there is a real benefit. But with international students, for example, usually they're only in your country for a few years. So it may be different cultures at different times, depending who's there. But there is benefit in, getting to know a group, and often through meeting somebody from that culture, you meet their friends and others from that culture, and you can have a broader ministry.
So a question here from Agnes Kaswaga, who's saying, how do you manage to to share your faith with different people from different national backgrounds, balancing it against a busy professional career? Is a busy professional career a hindrance or actually an aid to this kind of cross-cultural work?
Well, I think being busy, we can't devote as much time to friendships with internationals and things as people who do that. I mean, there are people who are full-time missionaries to internationals in our midst. But as you develop relationships, often it's fairly natural. People ask you questions. Sometimes things in our culture, especially if you live in predominantly Christian areas, there are things in our culture that can lead to openings to talk about why do we do it this way? Why do people in America care about people from other countries? Well, a lot of it goes back to our founding by people who are predominantly Christians, and God tells us to love our neighbor. Often they'll ask questions, like, why do you do this? Why? And, through answering their questions and also asking them questions. I think sometimes we forget the importance of listening. Someone has said God gave us 2 ears and only 1 mouth. So sometimes asking them about what they believe and why, and they may ask you in return, but it also helps you understand where they're at, what their concerns are.
Thanks. Shari, medical training, both undergraduate and postgraduate, has become something of an international business nowadays. And we're certainly very aware in ICMDA that there are particular hubs, Africans going to Cuba to study medicine, people from the Middle East and India going to Ukraine or Bulgaria, people, of course, coming to Western countries like Germany or the US or UK to do undergraduate or often more commonly postgraduate studies as well. Do you have any specific advice? This question from Jenny Alice, who's on this task group with ICMDA, about how we could best support international medical students and graduates, and an experience of being better organized to do this?
I think our local CMDAs are in a unique role there. One thing I'd like to see, even the CMDA that I work with, is to make them more aware of the opportunities they have with others around them. Actually, the two leaders of our local CMDA this year are from African countries originally. They are immigrants. Their parents came here, and I don't think either was actually born here. So sometimes they're from countries where their family's Christian, and they can reach out, and they have natural contacts with people from their people group. But I think the CMDAs are particularly well situated to do that if they have the vision for it. I don't think we should see CMDAs as a church, though. We should encourage each of the members to be part of a local church, but to see themselves as they're wherever you are in your work and your studies, God has you there for a reason, and we need to be aware of what opportunities are around us. I don't know if that helps.
You mentioned churches and how strategic and important churches are, and yet often churches don't have a vision for this. Often they maybe think of mission as pretty much in your first two categories of things. Well, the first of the four, believers going abroad to live in foreign countries voluntarily, as what mission is all about. How can we encourage churches to wake up more to the opportunities that God might be bringing to them right on their doorstep?
I think a major thing is basically what I just did this morning, going to the pastors or even maybe church conferences and sharing about this, helping wake them up to the opportunities that God doesn't just reach people by sending out missionaries, but He's sending people to us, and we're responsible to love them and reach out to them. I've been fortunate to be in a number of churches that had ministries to international students or refugees. And those churches can also share their vision with other churches. The missions pastor, if you have one, or the leader of the mission planning group or whatever, or even the pastor can share with gatherings of like-minded people, maybe all the in the city, all the different missions leaders get together. Unfortunately, so many of our churches, at least in the U.S., don't really focus on missions, even cross-culturally overseas, very much. So we need to give them the vision for all four kinds of groups. But, I think just sharing with them what I've shared in some form and praying that God will use it is the main thing. Asking them to, like I did you, to prayerfully consider what action to take, that God, once we have this information, we're responsible to act on it, not to just know about it.
Yes, often it seems to be more parachurch organizations than churches that are alert to these possibilities. But we've got a couple of questions here from an American context, which I put to you much the same. Catherine Stewart is asking, what are the Christian organizations in the US that might be ministering to refugees or internationals that we could get help, training, insights from? And there's another anonymous question from someone in Charlotte, North Carolina, saying their church is very eager to meet South Asian international postgraduate students, and asking, are there any parachurch organizations that they could partner with in a US context?
There are International Fellowship of Evangelical Students has groups in, I think, 180 countries. Yeah. In the U.S., InterVarsity Christian Fellowship has a particular, this is one of the resources I'll be giving you, has an emerging scholars network and a healthcare outreach ministry. There's a group, for instance, members of the church I'm in who are with China Outreach Ministries. They have people at various places around the U.S. working particularly with Chinese, and that's been quite an active ministry. Often starts with simple things like, going on walks together, having some basic Bible study, and quite a number have come to faith and been discipled before they return. So that's one. Horizons International has ministries to internationals in a number of places. I don't know of any that are just doing immigrants and refugees, but a number of churches or church groups or denominations have programs where they work with the U.S. group that brings in immigrants and refugees. I can't remember its name, but you can be someone who works with them just to meet people at the airport and do basic things to start. I'll try to think of any other groups I can put in the references, but I know China Outreach Ministries, Horizons International, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship.
Yeah, that's a good list, and we'll put some in the resources when we write to folk after this session. I think a lot of people, Shari, are hesitant to approach people from other ethnicities and backgrounds because they're not sure how to behave in the cultural context, afraid perhaps of offending, not knowing how to build friendships, maybe anxious about relating to people of other faiths that they know very little about, fear of imposing their own religion and so on. You know, the Western reticences, particularly that I'm talking about. What would you say in by means of encouragement to people who are thinking, well, yeah, I'd really like to do more of this, but I've got a lot of anxiety about it?
Well, I think everybody needs friends, of course, and that's where it always starts, whether it's with people from your own group or internationals. And it does take a certain amount of boldness. Like I said, it hasn't always been easy for me, but I just pray for God to help me. And because so many internationals are lonely and want someone who can be a cultural informer, help them understand how to do things, just taking a step can help. I know people are often worried, well, maybe I won't understand them or they won't understand me, but I've found they're very forgiving and they're not overly critical of your attempts to love them. You know, you may notice some negative reaction, but then you can always say, I'm sorry, did I do anything that offended you? I didn't mean to. My friend I walk with all the time has been in America quite a long time. She's from another country, and often I don't understand something she says, and I just ask her to say it again. And I don't think people are offended by that. And, just being a friend and stepping out is the crucial thing.
Yeah, I think that's been really come across very powerfully in what you've said today, both in the talk and the question answer, as to the importance of friendship. And I was struck by your story of the person that you'd known for many decades and was still in touch with, and they had not yet become a believer, but nonetheless, there was clearly a very strong friendship there. How important is friendship, do you think, as a key ingredient of meeting internationals?
I think it's very key. It's easy to talk to somebody once and that's the end of it, but it doesn't have much impact on either one of you. And it certainly doesn't open opportunities to really get to know each other and share at a deeper level what your real concerns and needs are. And we are busy. You can't do this with everyone. We all know we can only have a certain number of close friends. Certain cultures may be more demanding in friendship, expect you to basically be available to them around the clock whenever they have a question or need. And sometimes you have to talk about boundaries. But I think friendship is is critical. Most people don't come to faith because they heard a message on TV or in a church, but because they knew somebody who loved them and they admired, and they eventually asked about, or gave an opportunity for them to share why they're that kind of person.
Yes, I know what's been strikingly successful in our own context here in the UK with the Chinese, and there are so many Chinese families, particularly from Hong Kong. Most of them are quite well off. Some of them are strong believers. Others have really no knowledge of Christianity at all. But they all love coming along to the English language classes that our church is running every week, and dozens of people with their children, particularly mothers, and having a time to connect socially. And of course, that to hear a Christian talk, which is often helping them with their language as well, and just gradually learning more. But it's this whole thing about, you belong first and believe later, that you get
Right.
welcomed into the community first.
Yeah, and we at our church we have a big Christmas meal, for internationals, mainly students, but as part of that, the gospel is preached, and there's a lot of good food and fellowship, and they're usually very open to that kind of thing.
Any specific training resources you'd recommend, Shari, to people who are wanting to, to really grow in this whole area?
I have a couple that are in the resources that are already attached. I think one of the most impactful courses is Perspectives on the World Christian Movement, or now there's a Global Perspectives that's in many countries. It has four main emphases. First, the biblical basis of missions, which I just touched on a little piece of. Cultural things, mission strategy, and forgetting the fourth one. But that's a course. You can actually take it for a master's or bachelor's level credit as a mission course, at least in our country, and get credit at your whatever school you're in. There's also another one, I can't remember the name of, that's used in a number of other countries. You may know it, Peter, but a basic missions course. There are a number of books that's helped me a lot reading, like a couple references I had there. Ministering Cross-Culturally helps you see the differences between different cultural groups on about 10 different parameters. And we're kind of the opposite of Jesus on most of them in the West. About how time sensitive we are versus, just go with the relationship. Cross-cultural servanthood. So reading can help. There's a new course for healthcare professionals. I was trying to find the name of it, but it's kind of a healthcare perspectives course. And it's just starting. It's an online course. It's only in English so far as I know, but that would also be a possibility.
Well, we'll put heads together on this, Shari, after we've met, and when we write to people tomorrow, we'll include some of these resources for them. Just last question, really. I was struck you talking about essential preparation and empowerment, and you talked about the importance of prayer, befriending people particularly, but you also talked about being ready to step out of our comfort zones as well. Do you want to just say something more about that?
Well, I find that true in all evangelism personally. I mean, some people have the gift of evangelism and they can just talk to anybody anytime. I remember Bill Bright of Campus Crusade, now Cru, seemed like whatever situation he was in, he found a way to share the gospel. But most of us don't have that. And we need to realize that we can't bring anybody to believe, but our job is to be faithful witnesses. And so we need to look for opportunities and try to, say something, ask a question, or bring up a topic that can lead to a conversation. And personally, I don't feel like I've been that effective, but only God really knows. Most of us, becoming a believer is a journey, not an individual moment. And we may be just one little step along the way for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And God is sovereign, isn't he, acting at every moment. And it's a matter of us being willing to be used by him,
Right.
his strength and our weakness. Shari, thank you so much. We've sadly run out of time now, but it's been great to listen to you and to interact on the subject of going on mission without leaving home. And just a reminder again, that mission is not just sending people abroad, but it's looking for the opportunities around us that God creates, the open doors we might never have imagined were there. So it just remains to me again, Shari, to thank you so much for your time and expertise with us, for the encouragement and advice you've given us about this whole area. Thank you, all of you here coming and making it a success today. So we look forward to seeing you again soon on ICMDA webinars. May the Lord bless you.